Well, welcome to The Perspective today as we start our Sunday edition where we dig into the issues that affect us all. And there are lots of issues. There are tragedies. There are world cataclysmic events that are taking place. And to help me make sense of it all for you today, I've invited Pastor A.R. Bernard, who's with the Christian Cultural Center. He's been on our program at least 2 or 3 times in the past. He's comes to us out of Brooklyn, New York with a busy schedule, but God has given him, I believe, a word for this hour, a word for the nations as we process what's taking place in Ukraine, as we ponder some of the tragedies coming out of Turkey and Syria right now. And then as we bring it back to home about this whole problem of evil, what do we do? How do we cope? And where do we turn to? If you've ever pondered those questions, and if you're pondering it in your own life right now, I want you to stay tuned. We're going to watch together a clip from a year ago with Pastor Pavlo, who is in Ukraine, as he's talking about what is happening and sharing that. And now we're going to come back afterwards with Pastor Bernard, and we're going to discuss what's happened a year later. Stay with us right now. Well, I want to thank Pastor Pavlo Lozynsky for being with us today. And here in Canada, we call you Paul. Paul,
Yes.
Thank you for being here. I got your video the other day, and my heart was just kind of rent. Shared it with our church family. You've been to our church, and I want to thank you for coming on. Talk to me today about what is happening right now.
I don't know. I don't know if I can find the words. Well, I think it's unthinkable, unfathomable. Like it's hard to comprehend how in 21st century this absolutely unreasonable. There's no reason for this war whatsoever, but it's happening. It's really just unleashing of evil. I have no other words to say for that. It's just, like basically a couple of days ago, 6 days of the war, all of a sudden in the middle of the night, I received a phone call from my wife's sister in Kiev, who was in the last days of pregnancy, just crying that there's rockets and bombs falling outside. And the war started. So Russia is just brutally invading our country. Unfortunately, like they have their reasons totally made up. There's no historical reason for it whatsoever. There's tons of lies, and it's really betrayal. Like, I mean, it's hard for words for me. Like, I'm sorry, I'm emotional. It's
That's
just
okay.
People are dying, kids are dying. If you see the news today, it's just so much devastation. They're just shooting everywhere. Like they're shooting apartment buildings, dropping bombs right in downtown of major cities. It's absolutely nuts. It's just unleashing of evil.
So as you're processing this, and we're processing it from Canada and other people from around the world, there's protests everywhere. People are crying out. Do you feel the support of Western nations and other European countries?
Yes, we're thankful. There's, first of all, just moral support. Everybody seems to be pro-Ukrainian. At least there's only few countries that thinks otherwise, but everyone seems to support us. And there's also practical supports with weapons and needs and goods. But I think right now it's just like there was pictures like that we are like David against Goliath. The size of Russia, just as a country, and the size of their army and arms is much bigger. So just continue to support us. And I know it's dangerous, but it seems like we need more practical support to actually stop it. Like the sanctions are good, but it seems like Russians are really determined. They're ready to take that hit, and they just really determined to destroy Ukraine. So there has to be something stronger.
So I agree. There has to be more. But tell me, you're one of the people that are doing more, along with many other people. You talked just before we came on air about the solidarity of the people. Speak to that, and then tell me exactly what you're doing as a pastor and what you've been experiencing in your church.
Well, it's when this news hits you, it's really like every crisis. It's a test. It shows who you are, and it shows what you can do. Like you basically decide. I personally had all kinds of emotion. It's emotional roller coaster. I was thinking about evacuating my family first. And just getting into safety. And a lot of people have done that, and that's understandable. But then at the same time, I know I'm a missionary here and I'm called to serve people. I'm called to, like Jesus says, this is the true love, to lay your life down for your brothers and sisters. So we prayed and we decided to stay as long as we can and do things that we possibly can. We are located in far west city of Lviv. It's the biggest city in the west of Ukraine. And there's a flood of refugees here. People are just fleeing from all the eastern parts here. So basically our work right now is help to host these refugees for night. We've done it in our homes. We turned our church facility in a sort of a shelter, just like with beds and just to, and also we try to transport people to the borders, like organize. There's a group of volunteers who stay, just drive them, pick them up, and drive them to the borders because a lot of people are trying to flee to Europe, either to Poland or Hungary or Slovakia. So there's just basically trying to help with that, and it's really like every day changes. We cannot make up like a long-term plan for that. You have to see day by day. I'm still watching if there will be some like fighting happening closer to our city, then I'll probably try to evacuate my family. But our desire is to stay as long as we can and to help people and through that also share gospel of Jesus, because we do that because of Jesus' love, because Jesus went and died for us.
Pavlo, talk to me about the level of fear. What are people saying? Are they fearful of dying? You talked about camaraderie with the people. I'd like to hear about that.
Yes, well, I mean, it's a natural reaction. And like I mentioned, that I personally go through emotional roller coasters every day. If you see in the news something more scary, and I mean, every day they do something more terrible. Like they've been just last 2 days, they've been just dropping bombs on apartment buildings. It's nuts. So you are afraid. And, like emotionally, I also feel afraid. But I think courage is not a feeling, it's a choice. I just choose to do things that I can. Like, I don't feel courageous. I still feel fearful sometimes, but I just choose to do things that possible to do. And I know a lot of my brothers here too. So there's like evangelical churches, there's not that many in Lviv, but like maybe a dozen, like maybe 30. So we all like unite. We have just like via messengers, we talk to each other, we help each other, who has what. Somebody has clothing, somebody has food, somebody has beds, and we just try to coordinate and do the best we can. So pretty much every church is serving, but it's not just churches, it's the whole society. See, I think what happened, Putin, he really said this war because he wants to fight what Maidan, if you remember, that's like in 2014, the Revolution of Dignity was called. So he wanted to fight against that. And he said that he wants to free Ukrainians from that. But what he did, he turned the whole Ukraine into that Maidan revolution. So people are so united. There are people that on the east, they just go on the street and they try to stop tanks with their bare hands. The video is just amazing. If you see in my Facebook page, I post this from time to time. They just go with their bare hands against tanks. And because they say, no, you like, yeah, we don't have like, our weapons are weaker, we have less of them, but I think we have the most courageous people. And people realize that, no, we cannot give up our land. So there's this amazing uplifting of like camaraderie, and just people are united and people understand that we can help each other. And I think it's amazing. It's really dangerous, but it's amazing.
Well, welcome back to The Perspective. And as we process what took place a year ago, we want to bring it into context today. And Pastor Bernard, thank you for joining us. So glad you're with us.
My pleasure to be with you, Mike.
And tell everybody where you're speaking to us from today.
I am coming in from that great city of New York, right in the United States.
Okay, the Big Apple. I've heard of it before.
Well, Mike, we boast that there's New York and then there's the rest of America. But I'll get in trouble for saying that.
You know, I've lived in some pretty small towns in Canada as well, and they thought the rest of the world revolved around them as well.
Yes,
but anyways,
absolutely.
we'll go to bat on that one afterwards.
Okay.
Pastor, we see what's happening in Ukraine, and there's a part of us where we just want to pull back It's almost like we've had media overload. How do we process where we're at now, a year later? Nothing has been resolved. Emotions are intensifying. What are your thoughts?
I would like to begin with an aerial view. The words of Jesus said that between his first and second coming, his return to earth, those of us who embrace that tradition, there would be the rise and fall of nations and kingdoms. There would be conflicts for power and territory. And we're seeing the resurrection of an old conflict between Russia and the Ukraine. And of course, Russia's, formerly the Soviet Union's desire to dominate a major portion of that region. In fact, in the words of Vladimir Putin, the desire to reconstitute the Soviet Union under Mother Russia. So it's not surprising that, we're witnessing the spirit of domination, which is different from dominion, but the spirit of domination, which is a perversion of dominion, taking place. And then we have the complexity of the reality that there are people both in Russia and in the Ukraine who are God-fearing, God-loving people who are confused by the issues, trying to make sense of, who's right and who's wrong. And that's based upon the information that they've been receiving, how they are being informed, what narrative they've embraced. It's not as simple as we would like it to be. It is very complex. But then evil is complex. The Bible says that sin, iniquity, evil, or what Second Thessalonians calls lawlessness, is a mystery. It's called the mystery of iniquity. And a mystery conveys a sense of something that's hidden from our view. It expresses a deeper, invisible reality that influences and shapes the world in which we live.
Well, as I'm thinking about that and how we've been shaped, I remember as a young theology student, the class, we were going to discuss the problem of evil, and I thought we'd get it all solved because of what Jesus did on the cross. But the problem of evil continues in front of us. And I'm pondering on behalf of the people of Ukraine, and some of them have come into our church, and I'm hearing their incredible stories of being displaced, of being lost, and trying to find footing again as they're now in a new country, saying, how do we move on? But there are many good things happening. And I want you to talk to me about, although we can get carried away with evil, God is still in control. God is writing out the narrative.
Let me reflect, because, let's define what we're talking about when we think about evil or sin, because according to the biblical narrative, it existed before Adam and Eve, enters on the scene where Adam and Eve were in, a state of harmony with themselves, with God, and with the world. Sin is not or evil is not a problem we will solve. It's a mystery. It's a mystery to be explored, investigated, studied, analyzed, understood by its effects and its impact on human society and human existence. It essentially is rebellion to constituted authority, the divine authority of God. And the effects of evil that we wrestle with is essentially telling us what happens when we rebel against divine order and divine authority. And unfortunately, the innocent suffer for the guilty. We believe, we hold to a very clear, for those of us who subscribe to it, the concept of original sin. That something happened and it created a condition that we to this day continue in all of its manifestations to wrestle through. And it won't be dealt with until, God intervenes. And then it raises the question, well, where is God? As we see the injustices, when we see the pain, the suffering, the devastation caused by war and conflict, and how do we understand this kind of an aggression? And I take it back to the biblical narrative, that what we see is an aggression. It's violence rooted in it's violence that comes from an aggression that is rooted in alienation from God. The more we get away from God and ultimate reality and what reality should be like and what things should be like, the more we experience a deviation from that, and we continue to have the heartaches that we see before us. So, it's complex, but I think as you and I, were talking off air, that we need to focus not on the evil or what, some would say the devil is doing, but let's talk about what God is doing in the world, that God is at work. He didn't create all of this in the first 6 days of creation and then has been on vacation since then. That's not it. Jesus said, my Father works and I work. So God is very much at work, and he works within the entire scope of human experience. He sets the timetable for all events, worldwide, national, and personal. He works through his foreknowledge with free will, and his foreknowledge, doesn't violate free will in any way, and his what we call predestination is based upon his foreknowledge. So essentially, humanity is happening. Humans are making choices and decisions, some bad, some good, some aligned with God, and some not aligned with God. And we, as a human family, experience the results of those choices.
Let me jump in for a moment, if I could, because I think there's something that you've said a couple times in this conversation. And I'd like us just to take a slightly different track for a moment, because we're dealing with the pain of Ukraine and the evil that we see being played out. We're also reeling from another natural disaster. So if we call one the human disaster in Ukraine, where people are making these conscious choices to kill each other and reclaim whatever they think is their rightful piece of geographical turf, we also have the earthquake that has hit Turkey and Syria, and the numbers of lives that are being lost. No matter how we struggle with it at a theological level, we come down to a different level where it's just pain. There's pain when people die. Talk to me about the comfort that God can bring in the midst of what we see as just a painful situation.
I think it has to do with a vision of hope for the future. We're not left in despair. Yes, there will be casualties of the realities of human experience. Another thing that Jesus said, that there will be earthquakes. There will be manifestations within the system of things here on earth that point to a timetable towards his return. So we're seeing these disruptions. I love the way the Apostle Paul puts it in Romans 8. He said that all of creation groans and is in travail. And I think that these things are part of the groaning of not only creation that is human or within active living species, but also the systems and structures in which the material universe exists. So that is very real. And the beauty of it is that in the midst of all of this, God uses the human experience and the human story to bring hope that things won't be always like this. And that hope becomes an anchor for our soul. And if you know how an anchor works, think of a boat and an anchor. The anchor is settled at the bottom, but there could be a storm, wind, rain blowing against the boat, tossing it. What the anchor does, it keeps that boat from being carried away from the storms that it encounters.
And you know what I'd like to do right now? Something I've never done in television. And so this is going to be kind of a fun experience. I want to talk about that anchor, because I know that people are looking for comfort, they're looking for hope, they're looking for direction. And there's an incredible passage of scripture that has given hope and comfort to so many people. And that's the 23rd Psalm. And so we got about another 7 or 8 minutes that we can talk, but let's team teach that together. And as you're watching today, if you have a Bible, why don't you find it, open it up or flick to it on your device. And let's look at Psalm 23 as I'm going to teach it with Pastor A.R. Bernard. Stay with us. We'll be right back. A great comfort to the soul, an anchor in the storms of life is Psalm 23. And Pastor, you've preached it many times. I've preached it, shared it at funeral services. There's a couple things I love. We're going to do verses 1 to 4 in a minute, all right? I'm going to share 2 of the things that I hold on to. I want you to give me 2 thoughts. And then we're going to land in that part that says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. But you know, every time I read the Psalm, I just settle down with the fact that the Lord is my shepherd. I love that little word, my. It just speaks of a relationship that God longs for people to have. And I hope that our viewers are experiencing it today to know that he does care for me. And then I love the phrase, he restores my soul. Maybe that's part of my own journey. I remember redoing an old rocking chair before I got engaged to my wife. And an old man said to me, if you do a good enough job, you might get to use that rocking chair yourself one day. And I go through the whole story of restoration, how God has changed us. 2 things that stand out to me. What about for you?
Well, you know, those words, the Lord is my shepherd, for me, remind me, again, it brings me back to God at work in human history and human experience. It makes me think of God's providence. God is at work creatively. He's at work providentially. He's at work redemptively, and he's at work judicially in human society, leading us towards a very specific end and purpose, and that is the restoration of his original intent for creation. It makes me think of the immutability of God's promises, that what he promises, he will surely bring to pass. So when I think of God's providence, God's being a shepherd, and God's providence is that God is in control of human history. He is acting, guiding, he's guarding, he is supplying for us, he's providing for us. And if I believe that there is constantly this divine hand at work who wants me to experience good, then I can look at the verses where it says he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. He's offering a promise. And when we give a promise is a commitment concerning the future. It shapes our expectations. It shapes our actions. And you know, it also places us in a tension. A place of mental or emotional strain, you know, being stretched in new directions, and trying to strike a balance between the promise and the realities that we are experiencing. And it challenges us to have faith.
Well,
so there's so much in this text.
Yeah, there's so much. We're going to fight for airtime. But here goes. So if we talk about that tension, David talks about a very real tension, and he seems to be handling it different than most people when he says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. What's the first thought that comes to you when you hear those words?
I love the idea of a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Those enemies can be all the issues that we experience in life, not just national conflicts, international conflict, community conflict, but family conflicts, internal conflicts within ourselves. You know, the issues of struggling to pay the rent, to get the next meal on the table for ourselves or our families. I mean, it goes from the local to the global. That is a real tension. And the promise of a table before us in the presence of my enemies, which means I can trust God even when I'm facing the stress that is produced by these realities. So it gives me hope. And when I have hope, and hope stirs creativity, it makes us look at the future not just through threat, but the promise that it holds. Understanding that life is both threat and promise, opportunity with opposition, opposition with opportunity. It frames the way we experience life and take on the challenges of life.
You know, as I think about it, you know, I want to add my amen to what you've said. I've always had another picture in addition, is that David's in the protection of the Bedouin shepherd, our great shepherd. He's the one that's watching over us. And that's why, you know, if you think you're at war, the last thing you're going to do is sit down and have a feast. But that's the privilege of the children of God, because in the midst of the crisis, Jesus says to you, peace I give to you, not as the world gives, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, and neither let it be afraid. And David embodies this in the reality of this incredible psalm.
I love the personal touch and the personal relationship that you highlighted in the beginning. He is our shepherd, because unbelief is always a decision about the character of God. Will he keep his promise? Will he do what he said he would do? And faith embraces that character as immutable, consistent, and worthy of our trust, our dependency, and a feeling of safety and security.
You know, as we think of all the tragedy that the world is seeing, we've got a minute left. We come to that beautiful verse 6, where he says, goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Talk to me about heaven, because that's our hope.
Goodness.
That's our hope.
Well, you know, now we quickly refer to Jesus's prayer, the model prayer, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. You know, those words, thy kingdom come, is very, very important, because he's not pointing to a future kingdom. He is pointing to the presence and power of God here on earth right now to help us navigate the realities of this world, the things that we have to deal with, the tribulations that we have to deal with, and the fact that we can appeal to him to level the playing field of life, which we know is not level. So it is God here right now, yes, to come, but most importantly, Emmanuel, God with us right here in the midst of what we're going through. You know, the image of God in the fire with us as we're having faith.
Oh, I love that analogy, and we're going to have to wrap it up with that. Emmanuel, God with us. He's there in the fire, not only with you and me, but with everyone who choose to call him their friend and their Lord and Savior. Pastor, thank you for being with us today. Truly a privilege. God bless you. We've talked today about the reality that we are all facing, the wars, the rumors of wars, the natural disasters. But in the midst of that, God is in control. He's with you. He loves you. He wants to be your comfort. He wants to be your anchor. And most of all, he wants to be your shepherd. Ask him today to be the center of your life, and he will hear that prayer.